Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. We're in the Christmas season. I like to do some Christmas movie reviews at this time of year. And I like to, if I can, do movies that are maybe not as well known, not played over and over and over again during the season, at least in the last, decade or so. Movies like Miracle on 34th Street, which I love. It's a Wonderful Life, which I love. Christmas Story, which I love. The Bishop's Wife. Now, this is not a minor picture, and it's not a B movie, but I don't know that it is as well known as it probably really should be these days. It's a movie that my wife, who is a Christmas fanatic, was kind of like hesitant to watch back in the day. And she finally did. I think a lot of it being because of Cary Grant being in it. And she loved it. And then when I met her and we were dating, etc., she introduced me to it, and I loved it too. But I mean, even if you just look at the name, The Bishop's Wife, does not suggest that it's about a Christmas movie, that it has anything necessarily to do with Christmas, although we do see a little bit of a Christmas tree on the poster there. So I thought, hey, perfect movie for me to talk about on my channel. It's a little bit less well known and very appropriate for the season, and it is an excellent film. So let's get going on this one. We'll bring up the slideshow. And there are going to be spoilers because we are going to go through the entire movie. But I'll tell you what, no, you know what? Let's get the spoiler sign up right now, because I think some of the more spoilery aspects of the movie present themselves fairly early. All right, so Samuel Goldwyn presents, and here are three of the biggest reasons why this movie is great: Cary Grant, Loretta Young, and David Niven in The Bishop's Wife. The opening to this film is very understated. The music is very understated. And I think you get a good sense that you're heading into something that is charming. It's comedic, but it's not like a, slapstick or a screwball comedy, anything like that. And maybe you'll pick up that it has some very deep, meaningful moments in it. Great supporting cast. Monty Woolley, who, aside from being a really good actor, has one of the great names in the history of Hollywood. James Gleason, Gladys Cooper. She has a couple really nice moments in the movie. Elsa Lanchester. The Mitchell Boy Choir. Screenplay by Robert E. Sherwood and Leonardo Bercovici from the novel by Robert Nathan. Here we get some more credits. Music, Hugo Friedhofer. Like I said, the music's nice. It's not like it doesn't overpower the film in the least. And we do have a really nice bit with the choir. Costume designer Sharaf. I just love a one-name credit for anything, frankly. And again, this is not like, it's not one of those kind of movies that requires amazing costumes. They're real costumes. It's about, there's a supernatural element to it, but it's about real people and their real lives in 1947. Art direction, again, good. It supports the film. Film editor, set decorations, makeup. We don't need to go through every single one of these people, but they all did a fantastic job on the film. Director of photography, Greg Toland. Now, again, this isn't one of those movies that's, has amazing, incredible cinematography like you'd get from, some film noirs and things like that. It tells the story. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. And there are some really nice shots in it, and actually some really decent special effects directed by Henry Koster. So we begin the film seemingly flying over this city. We see the lights. We see, as we get closer, we see the buildings. And we eventually focus in on this man, played by Cary Grant. Seems to be just a normal guy, but, very handsome and well-tailored. Maybe a little better looking than most of us. Looking into the windows of this department store. And, he's initially looking in the windows where there's a nativity scene, and it's not very crowded. He slides over, and we see a display more of toys, and it's crowded with children looking in, and he smiles, at the children. So there's a message in this film. They're not pounding it into your head. It's forceful but gentle, you might say. But this is important to the film's theme, and we get an idea of the kind of person this is when he's helping this blind man to cross the street, and as he's doing so, he just starts heading across, and traffic stops for him as he's going. And then after, doing that for the blind man, he also prevents a baby carriage from rolling into the street. Mom had other kids. She was trying to help them see through the windows. The carriage starts rolling. He gets it just in the nick of time, and the woman is thanking him. And again, here you're getting a sense of the character. You're getting a sense that he may not be just a normal man, but he speaks with kindness and with affection, but also with authority. She says something like, "Oh, I can't believe this happened." And he's like, "Well, don't let it happen again." But again, it's not like it's not exactly scolding. There's something paternal about it. Cary Grant is excellent in this film. He has this sublime, happy confidence that he projects, which of course Cary Grant was really good at doing. Perfect person for this film and for this character. But he just does a fantastic job with it. His travels next bring him into contact with this woman, and he observes her from afar. And this is not an accident. The woman is Julia Brahm, and played by Loretta Young. She's looking in this shop window, admiring this hat. And she then, goes a little bit further on. And again, you can see he's observing her. He's watching her, but from afar. She goes a little further on to buy a Christmas tree in this little shop. And here she meets an old friend, Professor Wuthridge, played by Monty Woolley. And he's arguing back and forth with this shopkeeper about the price of a Christmas tree. Julia and him have a warm chat. And we learn that she once lived in the neighborhood and was good friends with him. We also learn from this scene that the professor is an atheist. And Julia asks, why would you be buying a Christmas tree? And it comes down to nostalgia. He says something to the effect, I feel at this time of year, it's a good time for looking backwards. And so they chat a little more, and he inquires about her husband, Henry. And, he's well, but there's obvious hurt and worry in her eyes. Her husband, Henry, is the bishop, and he's having trouble raising money to build a cathedral. So, of course, she is the bishop's wife from the title. And so with this angry Merry Christmas, the professor and the shopkeep end their business, and she gets her tree from the shopkeep. Please have it delivered. I think it was Christmas Eve, which traditionally, once upon a time, Christmas trees would go up on Christmas Eve when the kids were in bed. And so mom and dad would put up the Christmas tree and decorate it and put the packages under it. Remember, kids used to go to bed a little bit earlier, which helped. The idea being that Santa Claus brought the tree as well as the presents. Kids would get up in the morning and there's the whole tree. So it was a big surprise. Now, of course, I'm lucky if I can keep my wife from putting it up after Halloween. A little bit different these days. But so they say goodbye, and you get a good sense of the tone of the film from this opening sequence. It's gentle. It's a nice way to decompress from the holiday season, besides having just wonderful performances and a great theme and a great meaning to it as well. And as the professor and Julia part, he gives her this old Roman coin. He says it's not worth anything, but it's like my lucky piece, and maybe it'll bring luck to Henry in his trying to, raise this money for the cathedral. And at this, Julia kind of breaks down and cries on his shoulder. if only we could spend Christmas back here where we were so happy, if only we had never left. And obviously this resonates with a lot of us who, we've all had, at least most of us, I wish all of us, we've had times in our lives that just felt perfect. And truthfully, they don't usually last. Things change, people move away, and you suddenly go, oh, wow, I really miss, a few years ago, or, for some of us, decades ago when things were simpler. Heck, we all often miss childhood Christmases, which were always a lot simpler because we were just kids and we didn't have to really do anything. So, you feel where she's coming from here. And as they part, our mystery man now kind of enters the scene again. And he literally, on purpose, runs into the professor, strikes up a conversation, sort of acting as though he knows him from, the past. He was a past student of the professor's. Professor can't really remember him, but he's doing that kind of thing where, oh yes, of course, you. I think most of us have done that at some point. And so, posing as a former student and talking to him, he learns a little bit more about what's going on with Julia and Henry, and their troubles. And while they're walking towards the professor's apartment, we pass the church that Henry was once the pastor of before he became the bishop, St. Timothy's. And the professor says, yes, it's looks like it's going to close up. It's just too small. Cannot stand in the way of the march of progress. And of course, the professor doesn't say that happily. So Julia, meanwhile, has returned home, meets her maid, Matilda, played by Elsa Lanchester, the dog, Queenie. And, she arrives home. The maid is saying, well, yes, the bishop is still in a meeting with people, and, dinner is going to be ruined if we don't get it on the table pretty soon, that kind of thing. And so Julia, gets off the hat and coat, and it goes, she's going to go into the meeting. And there's a great moment where she walks up to this double door, or maybe it's a single door, I'm not sure. And she pauses for a moment and then opens it into a fairly unhappy scene. And you can understand why that pause takes place. It says a lot. And so they're in there, and she apologizes for being late, and her husband is very annoyed, and the meeting has not been going well. And so the woman seated there kind of in the center is Mrs. Hamilton. And so they're arguing with her over the design of the cathedral. She wants the altar for her husband to be more prominent. And the bishop's saying, you must understand, we cannot create this cathedral for the glorification of one man. And Mrs. Hamilton shows no respect for her bishop. Reminds him, I was key in getting you made bishop, and my donation is key in getting this cathedral made. So this cathedral will be built my way, or it will not be built at all. And we see, she's as rude as she is with him. She really is with her circle of friends as well. I know I always do my little quotes, and I realize nobody can see them because they're off screen. Friends. She's clearly a very bitter woman, and Julia looks with great sorrow on the way her husband is being treated by her. And so, yeah, she's a nasty piece of work. She's even mean to the dog, but maybe there's more to it than all this. And so they part, and things don't improve much after they leave. Henry, he's short-tempered here, but David Niven is so good in the role that you can tell that's not who that person is. That's not who Henry Brom really is. He's kind of a victim of what's going on around him. And he just, it was a ghastly afternoon, and Julia wasn't there, and that made it worse. And these two people really need each other's strength, but that need is almost like driving them apart. And Julia suggests, could we just delay the cathedral until after Christmas? And, the house of God cannot just be put off. So he's in this bind. Henry is in this bind. There's a lot of forces pulling at him, and he's trying to do the right things, but he's getting it wrong. And so at this point, Mrs. Castaway, who's Henry's secretary, appears, lets him know that there is a call that he needs to take. Julia sends her off, and they have this moment. Henry, what's happened to you? What's happened to us and our marriage? We used to be happy. We used to make other people happy. Oh, Henry, that was your gift. You're no financier, and you're not a promoter. And so, you're seeing where these people are. Yes, they're arguing and they're at odds, but it's for the right reason in a way, right? This isn't it's not a marriage that's pulling itself apart because the people don't love each other. It's almost a marriage pulling itself apart because they do love each other. And so the inability for them to connect, at this point is hurting them. It's deeply hurtful. At this point, she gives Henry the Roman coin, and it's valueless to him. And so you get a good sense of the theme here, which is the spiritual versus the material, which is a key element of Christianity and, of course, a key element of this film. And so this exchange leads to Henry losing his temper with Julia. It's beautifully played because, like I said, you have these two people and they're in an argument. But rather, I think, than you coming in and saying, well, I'm on this guy's side or I'm on her side, you're just seeing two people in a lot of pain, and turmoil. And I think key to the film is that you need to want to see these people get together. You don't want to see it's not a competition. You want them getting back together. You want their marriage to be whole again. And so you have this very quiet, terse meal. And the bishop does this kind of very quiet, cursory blessing. And so again, you're seeing he's saying the words of the blessing, but is he feeling it? Is he meaning it? And so in Henry, you have somebody who's lost his way, but not necessarily through any particular fault of his own. He's been given this job to do for the church, and he's trying to do it. And it's sort of taking precedence over things that are maybe, spiritually speaking, more important in his life. But we also see a glimmer of hope in this scene as Henry's playing with his fruit cocktail. And man, I love fruit cocktail. He softens and he starts making plans with Julia. We can go out tomorrow. We could go maybe see the professor. We could go, see the skaters in the park or go skating. We could have a lunch at Michelle's. We don't know what that is yet, but obviously it's important to both of them. And just as they're connecting again, business intrudes once again, and Miss Castaway's the person on the phone won't take no for an answer. So he excuses himself. He goes to his little office there in his home and gets on the phone. And so we learn that there's some meeting he's going to have to take tomorrow. And he also is reminded of a luncheon that he needs to speak at. And so we're already seeing he's going to have to break his promise once again to Julia. And he's very frustrated and he's feeling pulled apart. So he stands before this painting of the cathedral that he's trying to build, and he prays for guidance. He wants help, and he's kind of amazed that the painting sort of becomes illuminated before his eyes. And he hears the door behind him close, and he turns around to see nobody. He walks towards the door, and he turns again, and in the shadows he sees Cary Grant, which would be kind of cool, but also a little frightening. And casting Cary Grant here in the shadows is really smart because his help is not always going to feel like help to Henry. And Henry's at times going to wonder exactly who actually sent this guy. Where does he actually come from? And he asked the stranger, what can I do for you? And he replies, that isn't the question. What can I do for you? And again, Cary Grant, great in the role, and just has this calm and this serenity. And he tells Henry he's been instructed in answer to his prayer to come down and help him. And he is an angel. And of all the people who should be able to believe in angels, a bishop, when confronted with one, he has a hard time believing it. And you get that smile, that serenity. And it's great. And it's also going to drive Henry up a wall over the next couple of days of his life. And so, he explains to Henry a little bit about his assignment. And as he does, he spies the picture of Julia that's on this little side table. And he pauses for just a moment. And, Henry asks, well, will you perform a miracle? Dudley says, well, if necessary. Well, then why not just wave your hand and have the cathedral appear? But Henry, how would you explain it? And so Henry's assuming that the help he's there to provide is specifically in building the cathedral. He's pretty much convinced himself that's the only real problem I have right now. I get that thing dealt with and I'm good. I'm good to go. Julia now enters and meets this angel, not knowing that he is an angel. But she's delighted to discover that her husband now has an assistant. And this is something she's been praying for to help. So he'll have more time for other things and just have some assistance. And so when she leaves the room, she's kind of dazzled having met this man. And Henry's kind of like, are you sure you're an angel? Because his wife seemed a little taken with him. And again, this will be the first time, too, that you'll see him sort of be prevented from revealing that this man, Dudley, and I'll finally have a name for him now, that Dudley is an angel. And so he wonders how long this will take. Dudley says, well, until you can utter another prayer and truly say you have no more need of me. And then I will be gone and forgotten. And so as Henry turns to go back to the table, Dudley once again disappears. And as he's heading out, he sees the dog just looking up, like he's seen the passing of this angel. So Henry is visibly shaken when he gets back to the table. And this is really where the meat of the film begins. And so the next morning, he's also very disturbed when, sure enough, Dudley shows up bright and early. And this is the bishop's just gotten more bad news about funding for the cathedral. People who would promise to send, $1,000 and are sending 10 instead. So he's already in a bad mood. Here comes Dudley, smiling, waving. Hey, good. Everything's fine. And we see him, he meets Matilda, the maid. He meets Mildred, the secretary. And they're both like, kind of stunned by meeting him, which would probably be true if they had just met Cary Grant, let alone an angel. And so when Julia arrives downstairs, she discovers that Henry will not be able to go out with her as had been planned. She's extremely disappointed. And Niven is just, Loretta Young is very good in these scenes too, but Niven, it's just the way he plays it. It's just fantastic. And so at this point, Dudley, in the office with the bishop, discovers that Mrs. George B. Hamilton has pledged $1 million towards the building of the cathedral and has not yet written the check. And here we get a really important exchange between the two of them. Henry wishes that Dudley would just make haste. Let's get this going. And Dudley asks, because the cathedral must be built. And Henry says, yes, that's the most important thing. Dudley, or because Julia must be happy. And Dudley tells him it's going to be difficult to help until he's sure what Henry actually wants. Well, does Henry know what Henry actually wants? And as Henry leaves, very flustered for his meetings, he sees Dudley gazing upstairs where Julia is, and we see jealousy on his face. And so this gives Dudley a chance to look around. He finds that old Roman coin of the professors and he puts it in his pocket. And he also meets Henry and Julia's daughter, Debbie, is played by Carolyn Grimes, who you will probably recognize as Zuzu from It's a Wonderful Life. So she got to be in 2 really great Christmas movies, and she got to work with Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant, Loretta Young, and David. I mean, good man, that's pretty awesome for a young actress. And so nice little scene of her meeting Dudley. So Dudley goes back into the office and he deals with these index cards. And here we get a nice little special effect. It's done with animation, but it looks really great. There's not a lot of special effects in the movie, but they're all done very, very well and very effectively. And so he heads out to start solving everybody's problems. And Matilda, well, you need a scarf. You know, it's cold out. Well, I don't get cold. No, you need the scarf. Here, I got this for the bishop, but he never wears it. So he puts it on, So again, this is going to fuel the feeling of jealousy the bishop is going to be accumulating. And so while Julia and Debbie are in the park, and Debbie's very upset, Dudley arrives, just runs into them accidentally. And he helps Debbie get into this snowball fight. One of the kids in the snowball fight played the young Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life. So you see how the studio system works. And so she's really happy and back right. But at this point, Matilda arrives. Juliet said, why don't you go shopping? So she shows up and she goes, I got all my Christmas shopping done already. It was like a miracle. And she goes, I can take Debbie home. And so Dudley says to Julia, well, why don't we go to lunch at Michelle's? And so she's going to have a day, really a couple days with Dudley, doing the things that she really wants to be doing with her husband. And that's really key to all of this. So indeed, Henry and Julia do go to Michelle's. And he deals with this gaggle of busybodies that, those so-called friends of Mrs. Hamilton's. They have a really nice time, at the restaurant. And again, I love that, the busybodies see them come in and she's like, oh, this is going to be a problem. He brings them over. He basically gets them drunk. And there's this beautiful line in here, though, about the only constants in the world being youth and beauty, and that they're really the same thing. And he says, the only people who grow old were born old to begin with. You were born young, and you'll remain that way. Meanwhile, Henry has arrived home. He got out of the meeting so he could take Julia out. So he's kind of done what she really wants him to do, and they're not there. And he's not really happy about this, obviously. So Dudley and Julia also visit with the professor. And it's a great scene, and Woolley's really good in it. It involves another subtle miracle by Dudley. And from Woolley, you get, a man admitting his bitterness about his failures in life. And, he has this history that he's supposedly been working on for 20 years, and he hasn't written a single word of it. And Dudley, he gives him that coin back, and he knows this kind of secret history of this coin that sort of sparked something in the professor. And so he kind of renews his hope and his desire to get things done. So it's a meaningful scene, and it's really well played by everybody involved. And at one point, Dudley looks out the window. He sees the first star of evening, and he tells Julia, she must make a wish. And now she gets a little evasive and a little flustered. And well, it's getting late. We need to get out of here. Have to get back home. And as they leave, you see this effect that he's had on the professor. And the old atheist, tells him as they're leaving, God bless you both. To which Dudley replies, thank you. I'll pass the recommendation along. But you can see what his presence has done for the professor. Well, Henry has not had as nice an afternoon as Julia and Dudley. And he's pacing back and forth. And I've seen this movie over 20 times. And I had never noticed that just as he's moving off screen, there's this facial tick that he does. The comedy is can be very understated and very subtle in the movie, and you do discover things as you watch it. It's something else. And so everybody other than him seems to be really happy that Dudley is here. The cook and Matilda are making a special cake, kind of for Dudley's arrival. And so when Julia gets home, she greets Henry warmly. Oh, I wish you could have been with us. So it's not like she's ignoring him all of a sudden. But he is extremely annoyed. And he asks Dudley if he had a profitable afternoon. Well, yes. Did you? So they back in his office, and so they retire in there. And there's a funny bit. Henry has like this celery stalk that he keeps fumbling with. He puts it in his pocket. Did that before Doctor Who did. He wants proof that Dudley is an angel. He's becoming jealous, and he wants him to perform a miracle. Make a desk fly around the room. And Dudley's like, Henry, I'm not here to do tricks. He goes, well, I don't think you're an angel. I think you're a demon straight out of, and he's prevented from saying the word. Henry, oh, Henry, don't say that. And so Dudley then calmly walks out the door and closes it. And when Henry walks over to the door, it's locked. So there's a subtle little miracle. How did that happen? Because obviously Dudley doesn't have a key. And then at dinner, it's like, it's no better. Queenie, who always would sit next to Henry, walks over and is sitting next to Dudley instead. And Henry stares at him, and it's that smile. I think we would refer to that generally as a shit-eating grin that's on Cary Grant. That's just great. And that, again, this is the kind of humor. It's not like telling jokes. It's just the way people react to things. So it's a nice little scene. And we next see Henry and Julia in the boudoir, and Henry is looking very nervous because Julia does not seem unhappy. And of course, he didn't want her to be unhappy, but it was also a sign that she loved him, and he's starting to worry that maybe she's ready to move on to somebody different. In other words, Dudley. So his priorities in life are starting to line up. He's starting to get a better idea of what he really wants. And through the whole scene, he's kind of clumsily complimenting her, and and she reminds him, okay, tonight we need to go to St. Timothy's to see the choir practice. And, she kind of hopes that he can get some rest now that Dudley is here, which puts a frown back on his face. And when he heads downstairs, he sees Dudley is telling this Bible story to Debbie. And in particular, he's telling about David and the lion. And he's relating how, the angel came down to David and put ideas in David's head that he assumed were his own. And I like the way that in this scene, the bishop is sort of being instructed through a Bible story as told to a child, which kind of, sometimes we need to refocus. Sometimes we need the basics again. And it even brings a smile to Henry's face for a moment, but he doesn't embrace the moment. And he gets right back to the business of the cathedral. And he sets up another meeting with Mrs. Hamilton for 5:00 that night, which means once again, he's going to break a promise to Julia, but he's going to give in to all her demands. He just wants to get the cathedral built. He thinks that, get the cathedral built, I get rid of Dudley, I get my life back. That's what I want. And so he decides, all right, Henry or Dudley, you're going to go to the rehearsal with Julia. I'll meet up with you as soon as I'm done with Mrs. Hamilton. He doesn't think it's going to take long. He's about to experience another miracle that he's not going to like. And I'll note at this point, I'm doing this little rundown of the plot for people, and I'm mentioning a few things and themes. There's so many little wonderful, subtle moments in this movie that you just really have to watch it. I'm leaving quite a bit out. I'm really only hitting highlights here. So Henry goes and basically rolls over for Mrs. Hamilton. And in the process, though, he sat on this chair, and apparently it was recently varnished, although it should have been dry. and it is stuck to him. He has this chair stuck to his butt, and so he can't get out of there to go meet back up with Dudley and Julia. So he's being thwarted, and he's, of course, going to look at it as Dudley is trying to have Julia for himself, and he's using these things to stop me. It's an extremely funny scene, and it really well played by Niven. Again, I can't really do it justice just showing you the still image. And of course, in turn, Dudley and Julia watch the rehearsal, and there's another miracle that takes place there. And then they go skating, accompanied by their cab drivers, played by James Gleason. And again, you get a nice little scene there, a little ice skating scene, and more angelic magic, essentially. And as they arrive home, Henry is in his office looking very grim. And he really does feel as though Dudley is working against him. Dudley says, well, Julia had fun. And he says, well, I didn't have fun. And Dudley says, well, listen, if you'd sent me to represent you with Mrs. Hamilton, I would have gone. But you didn't. So I represented you with your wife. And Henry's like, look, you can leave now. I have solved my problem. Have you? And of course, he says, well, look, I'm going to get the cathedral. He just wants to get Dudley out of there. Dudley says, getting the money was a foregone conclusion if you were willing to sacrifice your principles. And the bishop says, don't you think that this glorious edifice is worth it? Dudley says, I'm not so sure how glorious it is when there's so much suffering in the world. Remember, this is just post-World War II. There was certainly a lot of suffering in the world. And Henry replies, he goes, well, we're dealing with a materialistic, selfish woman. She won't listen to that. Did you try? That's the question for him. Henry says, listen, I have my cathedral. Now I want you to leave. Leave me and Julia alone. Dudley says, well, why don't you pray for that? And he has this moment to the side. And he turns around, and Dudley seems to be gone for a moment. But in fact, he's not. He's just standing a little off screen. And Dudley goes, oh, Henry, that was no prayer. Well, it came right from the heart. And so Dudley warns, Henry, Julia's about to come down. Try to calm yourself. And he departs. And Henry tells Julia, I've fired Dudley. He was incompetent, inefficient, and I'm sick of the sight of him. And this is very hurtful to Julia, which of course doesn't make Henry any happier. And the next morning, all the women in the house are sad that Dudley is gone, and Debbie's very upset. And Julia says, look, he wouldn't leave us without saying goodbye. So don't worry. And she's putting up this very brave face, getting ready to go out to do all these Christmas Eve visits with her husband, wearing this hat that she bought while she was out with Dudley, which doesn't make him happy. And he's no more happy when they go down, and Sylvester, the cab driver's waiting. He was hoping there'd be another fun outing. And he mistakes the bishop for being like a preacher. He goes, oh, you and Dudley are getting married? And Sylvester, this is my husband, the bishop. Oh. So he's in a terrible state. Once they've left, Dudley arrives, kind of appearing in the office behind Miss Castaway. He sends her home. She had work to do. Sends her home. You go in. You go celebrate. And so while he's there, he and he does ask, about Julia, and oh well, she was very upset that you were gone. This makes Dudley look a little nervous. So she leaves. He rewrites Henry's sermon for that evening, and he decorates the Christmas tree. And here we get a little bit more special effects, really nicely done. And so now he has a couple stops to make himself. And most importantly is Mrs. Hamilton. And I'm not even going to tell you what goes on in the scene. Another nice special effect, but it's really, really moving scene. Beautifully acted between these two. And so maybe and the result of it is that maybe for the first time in decades, Mrs. Hamilton actually feels peace and forgiveness. And that's really important to the story. And so when the bishop and Julia arrive there, they find her a very different woman. And Julia guesses, Dudley's been here? Yes, he was, So you could see the bishop back there, and they discover she's not going to give the money to the cathedral. After all, she's going to give it to charity. And this is the last straw for Henry. He just excuses himself. I have to go take a walk, because he feels like he's lost everything now. He's lost the cathedral. He's lost Julia. And it's all because of Dudley. And he ends up visiting with the professor, and they discuss Dudley and his deeds. The professor's a little more positive about him than Henry is. And for the first time, Henry is able to tell somebody that Dudley is an angel. And this is a great, again, a very well acted scene. And at this point, Henry decides, with the professor's urging, he's going to fight for his wife. He's not going to just roll over for this angel. And we now get Dudley's last scene with Julia. And perhaps this is a test. He pledges his heart to her. And she reacts with fright and runs upstairs. So she passes his test, but maybe it was a test for him as well. Just another really well done scene. At the end of the movie, a lot of really great moments. And so Henry arrives, and he's jealous, and he's jealous of what he's accomplished. And truthfully, he might have accomplished the same things if he'd made different choices. But he confronts him, and, Julia means more to me than my life, because he says, you want to fight? Let's fight. And Dudley's like, I could destroy you with a lightning bolt. I don't care. She's more important to me than my life. And with that, he has won. And this is the sign that it's time for Dudley to leave. Now Henry knows what his heart has always desired. And Dudley says, your prayer has been answered. He says, my prayer has not been answered. I prayed for a cathedral. He goes, no, Henry, you prayed for guidance, and that has been given to you. And he then adds, and this is really great, he adds that, I'm leaving. You'll forget that I was ever here. All of you will. And I will never be back this way again. He says, well, was it because I was so hard to help? He goes, no, I'll ask to be assigned to the other side of the universe, because when an angel begins to envy the mortal that he's sent to help, it's a danger sign. He says, kiss her for me, you lucky Henry. And he turns and he walks away, and kind of fades out. And as he fades away, he is in fact forgotten. And so Henry runs upstairs to Julia, and it's beautiful, because it's not just that he's a changed man. He's changed back to what he was before all of this happened. This is the man she married, and he's so happy. And let's go out. Let's go downstairs. Let's drink the cider. Blah, blah. And she's, oh, we can't do that. It's for tomorrow. I don't care. And she says, well, you have your sermon tonight. Oh, that's even better. And so they're going to go to St. Timothy's for him to do his Christmas sermon. And so we're going to end with that sermon. We see the professor heading into the church, and as he's heading in, he turns and he sees this man looking, from the sidewalk. And of course, he doesn't know who he's looking at. So he just kind of looks, and he turns back around, goes into the church. And in the sermon, it is this plea, amidst all the activity and fun of Christmas, that we not forget Christ and what is due to him by Christians. Let us ask ourselves what he would wish for most, and then let each put in their share: loving kindness, warm hearts, and a stretched out hand of tolerance, all the shining gifts that make peace on earth. So it's a really beautiful sermon. And as it ends, we see Dudley walking off in the snow into the night. And there we go. The end. Merry Christmas to everybody out there. God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful time this year. If you find the time, I highly suggest The Bishop's Wife. It's a really funny, beautiful movie. Wonderful performances. Cannot recommend it enough. So with that, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture.